Welcome to Layer of the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, another in my series of heavy thoughts. This is where I take a moment to talk about some things that have been on my mind lately. And what has been on my mind lately is MTV. And was MTV a good thing for music, or was it a bad thing? What got me thinking about this was I made two recent videos. I made the Twisted Sister video and I made the Night Ranger video. And in both of them I talked about how I was in high school when MTV came out. So MTV had a big influence on what I listened to. I had three main ways of hearing music back then. The local classic rock radio station, where I was hearing my Beatles, Stones, AC/DC, Hendrix, that kind of stuff. My college radio stations, where I was hearing the more underground metal stuff at that time, not really underground, but not on mainstream radio, stuff like Accept and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and Michael Schenker, and that's where I heard all that kind of stuff for the first time. And then I had MTV, and MTV was where I was discovering the LA bands like Riot, Motley, Dokken, Twisted Sister, even though, I know that they're from New York, but you get what I mean. And it got me thinking, that was MTV a good or a bad thing for music? And I guess it was good in the sense that it was exposing me to some different music. I don't remember at that time, I could be wrong, I don't remember hearing a lot of these bands like Rat and Motley Crue. I remember hearing Motley Crue a lot on the radio. But bands like Dokken and stuff, I don't remember hearing Dokken on the radio back then. I'm guessing that they were getting airplay. I was listening to a classic rock station, so maybe that's why I wasn't hearing it. I don't know. I could be wrong. To help me out in the comments if you remember hearing that stuff. I mean, now you hear that stuff rather frequently, right? There's a radio station out of Tampa that plays a lot of that kind of stuff. You'll hear We're Not Gonna Take It. You'll hear In My Dreams. You'll hear tons of Motley Crue stuff, Looks That Kill and stuff like that. But for me, that stuff really came from MTV, which is a good thing. So MTV was exposing me to that. MTV was also exposing me to a lot of the sort of synth-driven European stuff, which at the time I didn't really care for because it didn't have enough heavy guitars and it didn't have enough guitar, period, in it for me. But later on I realized that I do have a soft spot for some of that stuff. I'm talking about like Human League or Missing Persons, Men Without Hats, sort of these just sort of fun bands. And so I guess that's a good thing. And at the time, there was a window with MTV where I think people were doing really creative stuff. When it first started, no one knew what to do with it, so all the videos were really simple. And then once it started to pick up some steam, people were putting out videos, but there wasn't a whole lot of like big-time creativity behind it. And then really with Michael Jackson, I would say, and like Thriller, him taking the whole video concept, like, okay, you can take this to a whole new level. And you started having really creative videos coming out, people trying to do unique, creative things. Like I remember, Aha, Take On Me. That was very unique, or like the pencil drawing thing. And the Tom Tom Club, I forget what the name of that song was. It was like a cartoon thing. But people were sort of experimenting and pushing boundaries with it. And then, of course, I think the negative part of it then was, in the early days of MTV, they were playing a fair amount of artists that were established before MTV had come around. But within a couple of years, there were then artists that were, okay, and record labels, you got to look good because it's going to be about the video. So looks and all that stuff became a big thing. For instance, think about Phil Collins from Genesis. I mean, Genesis survived the MTV era, but really, I think it was just because they were already going, and when MTV first started, they had some videos that got on there. I mean, he's a guy that does not look like, you know, he's balding and everything, and I love his voice, and I like some of that Genesis stuff from that era. But if they were a brand new band looking like that, they probably wouldn't have gotten on MTV. I mean, guys like them and Joe Jackson and people like that. I mean, good music, but they didn't fit that mold then that what MTV turned into, which was sort of the you know, Duran Duran. Even though I like Duran Duran, you know, I don't know. They're just, I don't know who some of these bands are, but they just became a thing then where the look became very, very important. And even in metal, you know, I think MTV threw gasoline on the whole fire of, like, by the time Poison came around and that whole thing, then you had to have a look, you had to have a certain image, and I think MTV was a huge part of driving that, where if you didn't have this look or image, you know, you stood no chance. But it was an avenue that before this, the only way for a band to break big was radio. And now with MTV, it was a whole different avenue, where if you could break big on MTV, and that would be enough to push a couple million copies of a record. Quiet Riot is a good example of this. I heard an interview with their manager at Spencer Proffer, the guy that recorded them. He had a recording studio. I don't know exactly. I don't think he was really their manager, but he talked about how radio, you know, he got like just a handful of radio stations that would play anything from the record, and it wasn't until they made the video for Metal Health and then Come On Feel the Noise, and they broke on MTV, which caused them to break on radio and helped sell, you know, millions of copies of that album. So it created this new sort of area where you could push and promote bands, and it was, you know, there was a period there where MTV was really hip. If you were a kid, you wanted to have it at your house. You wanted to be able to talk about the new videos. I remember when Thriller debuted, it seemed like everybody was glued to the TV, and that's what everybody was talking about that next morning at school. It was a big thing, and it really sort of defined a generation. Sadly, you know, again, the negatives, it sort of created this superficial thing where you had to have a certain look. It also sort of pushed music in a direction where the videos and the imagery and the stuff in the video overshadowed the music. You could take a mediocre song, if you put a lot of budget into the video, it could make that song a success, make that album a success. And so there was a point where it felt like there was a real nice zone there for so many years where it was like good songs with good creative videos. But then the pendulum sort of swung where it was just like, all right, just get some good-looking guys together with some mediocre songs, and we'll dump a lot into a video, and that's going to help sell a million copies. And I think it created that kind of thing. But when you think about it now, I mean, YouTube, my gosh, you know, you have to trace some of that back to MTV. I also do blame MTV for, you know, once they started getting away from music and getting into the game shows and reality TV, it really, you know, they created a whole bunch of other things, like reality television really started on MTV with The Real World. And again, something that started off creative turned into a cliched, you know, ridiculous thing very quickly. Also the game show type of thing, the goofy game shows that they used to have on and stuff. And now, I mean, does anybody watch MTV anymore? I mean, it's so, I just mentioned earlier what a touchstone and thing it was as a child of the 80s, what a big thing MTV was. You know, that almost symbolizes that sort of middle 80s period for metal, the rocket ship going up in the air and everything. I got a 16-year-old son. He's never seen MTV. I don't even know if he has the slightest clue what it's even about. You know, because now with YouTube, it's pointless and everything. You can just, I mean, he watches videos on YouTube and stuff. But you know, MTV, you could tell me it's not even. I have no idea if it's. I'm assuming it still exists, but I have absolutely no clue, and I have no desire to even you know, research it or look. I don't have cable anymore, so So MTV is just, it is nothing of what it was, but it was really something that defined a generation, defined an era, was a real cultural thing too. When they got behind certain things, I remember, if they got behind some cause or something, like when, Live Aid and Here in Aid, I think was the other one. Uh, the one I can't remember what it was called, Relief for Africa or something like that. When they got behind these things, it was a big thing, and I'd say that lasted into the '90s. I mean, they were shaping how people dressed, how people. I mean, they really had a huge effect on society, and for the better, maybe to some degrees for some of the reasons I mentioned, and maybe for some reasons not for the better. So I don't know. So all right, it's hard for me to be a unbiased judge with this because again, it was such a part of my youth. So I'd be curious to hear from people that are older than me that were discovering music in the '70s. What did you think when MTV came out? Did it affect you at all? Were you into it at all? Did you think it was a good thing, a bad thing? And I'd also be curious to hear from younger people too, people who missed that sort of golden era that maybe only came in when they were just doing TRL Live or those types of things. Did MTV have any meaning to you at all? All right, let me know down in the comments down below. I'd be really interested to hear. So, okay, there you go. Heavy thoughts. MTV, a good or a bad thing? The legacy of MTV. Let me know in the comments. Till we see you again. Make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.